What if I told you that hidden beneath the Arizona desert lies a network of sacred springs so powerful they could heal not just broken bodies but broken communities? What if a single storm could deliver a pregnant woman to the doorstep of a grief-stricken rancher, setting in motion events that would challenge everything the Wild West believed about race culture and the meaning of family? This is the story of Samuel Crow Feather, a man who lost everything and found something greater. A tale of sacred waters that choose their guardians, of three cultures united by love, stronger than hatred, and of a school built from the ashes of tragedy that would change the American Southwest forever. But before hope could triumph, blood would flow. Before healing could begin, ancient enemies would rise from the dead to claim what was never theirs to take. The sacred waters were calling. The question was, who would be brave enough to answer? Stay with me, because this story will take you on a journey through the heart of the American frontier, where mystical powers meet brutal reality, where love conquers prejudice, and where the most broken souls become the strongest guardians. Let's begin with a storm. Three cultures. One sacred water, the man who built a school from love, and loss. Epic Western romance. A tale of love loss in the sacred waters of Arizona territory. 1885, Chapter 1. Thunder before rain, the dust devil rose from the Arizona desert like a prayer made visible, spiraling toward heaven, with arms full of red earth and broken dreams. Samuel Crow Feather wiped sweat from his weathered face and squinted into the approaching storm, his Navajo grandmother's voice echoing across 35 years of memory. When the earth dances with the sky, grandson, pay attention. The spirits are trying to tell you something. Sam had stopped listening to spirits 3 years ago. 3 years since Isabella died. 3 years since little Sophia followed her mother into the darkness. 3 years since he'd learned that a man could live with a heart full of ash and still keep breathing. Thunder rolled across Thunder Mesa Ranch like the drums of war. His cattle huddled against the southern fence, sensing what was coming. Sam's hands tightened on the wire cutters as he worked to repair the break that had cost him 6 head last week. The Scots blood from his father gave him the stubborn persistence to work through any storm. The Navajo blood from his mother whispered warnings he'd trained himself to ignore. Lightning split the darkening sky, illuminating the cottonwoods that bent like mourners in the wind. In that brief electric moment, Sam saw something that made his pulse quicken, a horse riderless, stumbling across the desert toward his ranch, with the desperate gait of an animal pushed beyond endurance. The mare collapsed 50 yards from his fence line, foam flecking her muzzle sides, heaving with exhaustion. Sam approached carefully, his boots finding purchase on the hardpan earth. This wasn't just any horse. The silver conchos on her bridle, the tooled leather saddle with its distinctive Mexican craftsmanship, this animal had traveled far to reach his doorstep. Dark stains on the saddle horn, more on the stirrup leather. Blood. Someone had been hurt, and recently. Sam's Army Scout instincts, dormant for 3 years but never truly dead, sparked to life. He scanned the desert, searching for signs of pursuit or ambush, but found only the endless Arizona sky and the crying of the wind. The mare whinnied softly, turning her great head toward the creek that gave his ranch its name, Sacred Heart Springs, where the water ran clear even in the driest seasons, fed by underground sources his grandmother had never fully explained. That's where he found her. The woman lay half submerged in the shallow creek, her dark hair streaming around her face like black silk. The water, normally crystal clear, swirled pink with her blood. She was unconscious but breathing, and obviously with child, perhaps 7 months along by Sam's inexperienced estimation. For a moment that stretched like eternity, Sam froze. The sight of her there, vulnerable and bleeding, brought back memories he'd spent 3 years trying to bury. Isabella lying in their bed after the fever took her. Little Sophia, no bigger than a whisper, growing cold in his arms. But this woman was still breathing, still fighting. Sam waded into the creek, the cold water shocking his system into action. She was lighter than he'd expected, though her condition made him handle her with the care he'd once reserved for newborn colts. Her clothes were quality, a riding skirt of fine wool, boots that spoke of money and education. But it was her face that stopped him cold as another lightning flash illuminated her features. She looked like Isabella. Not exactly. This woman's face was rounder, softer, with the same high cheekbones and olive skin that spoke of Spanish blood mixed with something else. But there was something hauntingly familiar about her features, as if the storm had conjured her from his deepest longings. Diego, she whispered without opening her eyes, her voice barely audible above the thunder. Diego, they found us. Sam's hands stilled. Diego. The name hit him like a physical blow, bringing with it a flood of memories he'd thought safely buried. Diego Delacroix, Isabella's brother. Diego who'd introduced Sam to his sister 5 years ago in Tucson. Diego who died in a mining accident 18 months back or so, the reports had claimed. The woman she had to be Diego's wife, though Sam had never met her, stirred in his arms. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes the color of strong coffee, and for a heartbeat they stared at each other in the storm-washed darkness. Dios mío, she breathed, her hand rising to touch his face with trembling fingers. Diego, is it really you? Sam's world tilted on its axis. Standing there in the creek with this stranger in his arms, he understood why she'd mistaken him for her husband. Because when she looked at him through pain-glazed eyes, she saw the face of a dead man, a man whose ghost had haunted Sam's dreams for 18 long months. I'm not Diego, he said gently, his voice barely carrying over the storm. My name is Samuel Crowfeather. You're safe now. But even as he spoke the words, he wondered if they were true. Because the woman in his arms carried secrets in her coffee-colored eyes, and secrets in Arizona territory had a way of getting good men killed. Inside the ranch house, Sam moved with the efficient care of a man who'd tended wounds before. He laid the woman on the bed in what had once been his and Isabella's room, then busied himself gathering supplies, clean cloth whiskey, for disinfecting water heated on the wood-burning stove. The storm continued its assault on the windows, but inside the small bedroom, a different kind of tempest was brewing. The woman had slipped back into unconsciousness, but she murmured constantly in Spanish words about water and danger, about someone named Colonel Kane, about a child who must be protected at all costs. As Sam cleaned the cut on her forehead, a clean slice that spoke of a blade rather than accident, he studied her face in the lamplight. The resemblance to Isabella was undeniable, but there were differences too. This woman's features held a strength that Isabella's gentleness had sometimes lacked, a hardness born of struggle and determination. Her saddlebags, which he'd retrieved from the collapsed mare, sat on the dresser like accusations. Sam had spent 3 years learning to mind his own business, but the scout in him couldn't resist examining their contents. What he found made his blood run cold. Ancient artifacts that looked Aztec in origin, obsidian blades, jade figurines, and strange symbols carved into stone tablets. A leather-wrapped bundle that contained what appeared to be maps drawn in multiple hands and showing waterways that didn't match any territory Sam knew. And most disturbing of all, a daguerreotype photograph that made his hands shake. The man in the photograph was Diego Delacroix, but it might as well have been Sam's own reflection. The same dark hair, the same strong jaw, the same eyes that held secrets and sorrow in equal measure. They could have been brothers, these two men, separated by nationality and fate. We were born under the same star, the woman whispered from the bed, startling him from his thoughts. Her eyes were open now, lucid, but filled with a pain that had nothing to do with her physical wounds. That's what Padre Francisco said when he first saw you both together. Two sides of the same soul, destined to guard the same sacred trust. I don't understand, and Sam said, though part of him, the part that had always felt incomplete since Diego's death, understood perfectly. The woman struggled to sit up, one hand protectively cradling her belly. Diego spoke of you often, Samuel Crowfeather, his partner, his brother in all but blood. He said you were the only man who truly understood the old ways, who listened when the land spoke. Diego's dead, Sam said flatly, the words tasting like ashes in his mouth. Died 18 months ago in a mining accident near Tombstone. See, I know. I was his wife. The woman's voice broke on the last word, and Sam saw tears trace silver paths down her cheeks. But his death was no accident, Samuel. He was murdered because he discovered something that powerful men would kill to possess. She reached toward the artifacts with reverent hands. The Corazón de Agua, heart of water. Diego found the source, learned its secrets from the old Apache medicine men and my grandmother's Aztec bloodline. But Colonel Kane learned of it too, and he wants to control it, to use its power for his own ends. Sam stared at the ancient artifacts, his mind reeling. He'd always known there was something special about sacred heart springs, something that couldn't be explained by geology or groundwater tables. Even in the worst drought years, his creek never ran dry. Animals came from miles around to drink from it, and they always seemed healthier afterward, their coats shinier, their wounds healing faster than nature should allow. What kind of power, he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. The power to heal, the woman said simply. To cure sickness, to mend broken bodies, perhaps even to extend life itself. Diego believed it was connected to an underground river system that the indigenous peoples considered so sacred, a network of springs and wells that stretched across the entire Southwest. Lightning flashed again, and in its brief illumination, Sam saw something else in the woman's eyes. Hope and desperate need warring with exhaustion and fear. "My child," she whispered, her hand moving to her belly. "Something is wrong. I've been bleeding and the baby doesn't move as it should." The curandera in Santa Fe said. Her voice trailed off, but the implication hung heavy in the air between them. "You came here for the water," Sam said, understanding flooding through him like a physical force. The woman nodded, tears flowing freely now. "Diego told me about Sacred Heart Springs, said it was connected to the source. If something ever happened to him, if I needed help, I should find you. He said you were a guardian, even if you didn't know it yet." Sam looked at the ancient artifacts, then at the woman who carried Diego's child and wore Diego's trust like a sacred burden. Outside, the storm was beginning to weaken, but inside this small room, larger forces were gathering. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Esperanza," she replied, and somehow he'd known it would be a name like music, a name that meant hope. "Esperanza de la Croix, and you're the man my husband trusted with his life. The man he said would protect what he couldn't." Before Sam could respond, a sound that didn't belong to the storm drifted through the night, the unmistakable sound of a child's voice singing in Navajo. Sam's blood ran cold. In all the commotion of the storm and Esperanza's arrival, he'd forgotten about Tahoe, the 10-year-old Navajo boy he'd been secretly caring for since finding him half dead from starvation 8 months ago. The child whose presence he'd kept hidden from everyone, even the few neighbors who occasionally stopped by. "Little one," Sam called out in Navajo, his voice gentle despite the circumstances. "Come meet our guest." Esperanza's eyes widened as she heard the exchange. A small figure appeared in the doorway, a Navajo boy with dark eyes that held depths no 10-year-old should possess. He moved with the careful grace of someone who'd learned early that the world could be dangerous, but there was something else about him, something that made the air in the room feel different. "The water spirits told me she would come," Tahoe said in accented English, his young voice carrying an eerie certainty. "They said she carries the old blood, like you do. They said the three of us are meant to protect the sacred places together." Esperanza stared at the boy with growing wonder. "You can hear them, the spirits." Tahoe nodded solemnly. "They speak in the sound of running water. They remember everything, every guardian who has protected them, every promise made in their name. They say the bad man with dead eyes comes soon, but we are ready now." "Dead eyes?" Sam asked, though he was beginning to suspect he knew the answer. "Colonel Kane," Esperanza whispered, terror replacing hope in her dark eyes. "Dios mío, he's found me." As if summoned by her words, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drifted through the dying storm, multiple riders moving fast despite the wet ground. "How many men does he have?" Sam asked, already checking his weapons. "Enough," Esperanza replied, struggling to stand. "And they're led by soldiers who've forgotten their honor. Kane commands them with gold and fear." Sam moved to the window, peering out into the lightning-split darkness. In the distance, he could see torches bobbing through the rain riders, approaching his ranch with purpose and determination. "Tahoe," he said quietly, "take Esperanza to the back room. There's a rifle in the cabinet and a window that looks out on the creek. If things go bad, you both run for the water and don't look back." "I won't leave you to face them alone," Esperanza said firmly. "You will if I tell you to," Sam said, his voice hardening. "Your child's life depends on it." And Esperanza. He turned to face her, and she saw something in his eyes that had been sleeping for 3 years, purpose, determination, and the cold steel that had once made him one of the most feared scouts in the territory. "Diego was my brother in all the ways that mattered. That makes his wife and child my responsibility. That makes his fight my fight." The sound of hoofbeats was closer now, and Sam could hear voices calling out through the storm. Soon, very soon, the reckoning would begin. But for the first time in 3 years, Samuel Crowfeather felt truly alive. Chapter 2. Echoes of the lost. The riders materialized from the storm like phantoms of vengeance, their torches cutting through the darkness as they surrounded Thunder Mesa Ranch. Sam counted at least 12 men, all heavily armed, all moving with the practiced precision of soldiers who'd killed before and would kill again. From his position by the front window, Sam could see their leader, a tall man with silver hair, in the bearing of someone accustomed to command. Even through the rain and distance, there was something familiar about the way he sat his horse, something that made Sam's trigger finger itch with recognition. Crowfeather. The voice cut through the storm like a blade cultured and commanding. Colonel Marcus Kane, representing the interests of the United States Army and certain private investors. We know you're harboring a fugitive. Send her out and we can settle this like civilized men. Sam felt his blood turn to ice. Kane. Even the name carried echoes of violence and betrayal. This was the man who'd orchestrated Diego's murder, who'd spent months hunting for the secrets of the Corazon de Agua. This is private property, Kane, Sam called back, his Winchester trained on the man's chest. State your business or ride on. Kane's laughter was like breaking glass in the night. My business is with the woman Crowfeather. She's stolen property belonging to the United States government, documents, maps, certain artifacts of strategic importance. Return them and we'll be on our way. Haven't seen any woman, Sam lied smoothly, but you're welcome to water your horses at the creek before you move on. How generous. You know, Crowfeather, I've been looking forward to this meeting for quite some time. Kane's voice carried a note of anticipation that made Sam's skin crawl. Ever since that unfortunate incident with your family 3 years ago. Amazing how often good men meet tragic ends when they involve themselves in affairs that don't concern them. The words hit Sam like physical blows. Kane wasn't just admitting to Isabella and Sophia's murder. He was gloating about it. Behind him, Sam heard Tahoe's small voice speaking in Navajo to Esperanza, teaching her the words for danger, for protection, for the spirits that guarded sacred places. The boy's presence in the house had always felt like a gift from his grandmother's people, but now Sam understood it was something more. Tahoe wasn't just a child he'd rescued, he was a bridge between worlds, a keeper of knowledge that would be needed in the trials ahead. Samuel. Esperanza's voice was soft but steady as she emerged from the back room, Tahoe's small hand clasped in hers. There's something you need to know about Isabella, something Diego made me promise to tell you if anything happened to him. Sam's attention split between the approaching threat outside and the woman behind him. This isn't the time. It is exactly the time, Esperanza interrupted, her dark eyes holding depths of knowledge he'd never seen before. Isabella wasn't just your wife, Samuel. She was a guardian like her grandmother before her. She knew about the sacred waters, knew about the network of springs that keep this land alive. The revelation hit Sam like a physical blow. That's impossible. She never said, because she was protecting you and protecting the secret. Esperanza moved to the window, studying Kane's forces with tactical eyes that reminded Sam she was Diego's wife, trained in the same skills that had kept him alive for years. She left messages, Samuel, hidden in places only family would look. Diego found them after she died. She pulled a small silver locket from beneath her blouse, Isabella's locket, the one Sam had buried with her 3 years ago. She wanted you to have this when you were ready to understand your true purpose. With trembling fingers, Sam opened the locket. Inside, where Isabella's portrait should have been, was a tiny piece of turquoise carved with Navajo symbols he recognized from his grandmother's teachings. But more than that, wrapped around the stone, was a piece of paper covered in Isabella's careful handwriting. Mi amor, if you are reading this, then the time has come for you to embrace what you have always been, a guardian of the sacred waters. Trust Tahoe. Trust Diego's family. Trust the spirits that have always whispered to your Navajo heart. The Corazon de Agua must be protected, and you are the bridge between all worlds that can ensure its safety. I love you across all time and space, Isabella. She knew, Sam whispered, understanding flooding through him like the Sacred Heart springs after a storm. She knew this day would come, and she prepared for it. Esperanza said, her hand finding his in the darkness. Just as Diego prepared me. Just as your grandmother prepared you, even if you didn't understand her lessons at the time. Tahoe moved to Sam's other side, his young face grave with responsibility. Beyond his years. The water spirits have been waiting, Uncle Samuel. Waiting for you to remember who you are. Waiting for all of us to come together. Outside, Kane's voice rose again, but this time there was impatience in it. I'm losing patience, Crow Feather. The woman comes out now or we come in shooting. Your choice. That's when Tahoe did something that made both adults stare in wonder. The boy moved to the stone fireplace and placed his small hands against the hearthstones. Where his fingers touched the rock, symbols began to glow with a soft, phosphorescent light. Navajo pictographs that had been hidden in plain sight for decades. Grandmother's tunnel, Tahoe said simply. She carved the path when the soldiers first came to steal the water. She knew we would need it someday. As if responding to the boy's words, one of the hearthstones shifted slightly. Sam watched in amazement as Tahoe pressed his hand against what appeared to be solid rock, and a section of the wall swung inward on hidden hinges. How long has this been here? Esperanza breathed. Since before my grandfather built this house, Sam realized. The Navajo always said this land was sacred. I thought they just meant the spring. More voices erupted outside, followed by the sound of boots on the front porch. Kane's men were preparing to storm the house. The tunnel leads to the sacred place, Tahoe said, his young voice carrying absolute certainty. But we must all go together. The spirits say only the three together can walk the path and close it behind us. Sam looked at Esperanza, seeing his own recognition reflected in her eyes. Whatever was happening here was bigger than any of them had imagined. The artifacts in her saddlebags, the maps showing ancient waterways, Tahoe's supernatural connection to the springs, it was all connected to something that had been building for generations. The front door exploded inward just as the three of them slipped through the hidden passage. Kane and his men burst into the house, guns drawn, expecting to find cowering prey. Instead, they found only empty rooms in the fading echo of footsteps. Damn it, Kane snarled, kicking over a chair. Search everything. They can't have gone far. But Sam, Esperanza and Tahoe were already deep underground, following a tunnel carved from living rock by Navajo hands generations ago. The passage was narrow but well made, with symbols carved into the walls that it seemed to glow with their own inner light. How is this possible? Esperanza whispered as they moved through the underground passage. Navajo engineering. Sam replied, his voice filled with new respect for his grandmother's people. They've been protecting these springs for centuries. We just never knew how deep their preparations went. Tahoe led them through the twisting passages with the confidence of someone following a familiar path. The boy's eyes seemed to see things in the darkness that Sam and Esperanza missed, handholds carved into the rock-hidden chambers, stocked with supplies, ancient symbols that told stories of guardians and sacred trust. As they walked, Esperanza shared what Diego had learned in his final months. The network of sacred springs wasn't just about healing, it was about balance. The underground rivers carried more than water. They carried the memories and wisdom of all the peoples who had lived on this land. Disturb that balance and the entire ecosystem of the Southwest could collapse. That's why Kane wants control, she explained, as they navigated a particularly narrow section of tunnel. He's not just after profit, he's after power, the power to control life and death across hundreds of miles of desert. There, Tahoe said, finally pointing ahead to where pale light filtered down from above. The heart chamber. They emerged into a natural cavern that took Sam's breath away. The space was vast, lit by phosphorescent minerals in the rock walls that cast everything in an ethereal blue-green glow. At the center of the chamber lay a pool of water so clear, it seemed like liquid crystal. This was the true source of Sacred Heart Springs, not just a creek, but a window into the underground river system that the indigenous peoples had guarded for generations. But what struck Sam most powerfully was the sense of presence in the cavern. Ancient pictographs covered the walls, telling stories and symbols that spoke to his Navajo blood, even as his Scottish mind tried to rationalize what he was seeing. This wasn't just a natural formation, it was a cathedral, a sacred space where the spiritual and physical worlds touched. The Corazón de Agua, Esperanza breathed, moving toward the pool. It's more beautiful than Diego described. She knelt beside the sacred spring, and as her hands touched the water, something miraculous happened. The bleeding that had been slowly draining her strength stopped completely. Color returned to her pale cheeks, and for the first time in weeks, she felt her baby move with strong, healthy kicks. The child grows strong, Tahoe said solemnly. The water knows its own. But their moment of wonder was shattered by voices echoing down from the tunnel behind them. Kane had found the hidden entrance. Chapter 3, The Water's Memory. They're coming, Sam said, checking his ammunition. How many more ways out of here? Tahoe pointed to several dark passages leading away from the central chamber. 7 paths, all lead to sacred places, but the water spirits are angry at the dead-eyed man. They will not let him pass easily. As if summoned by the boy's words, the water in the sacred pool began to glow more brightly. The very air in the cavern seemed to thicken with an otherworldly presence, and Sam could swear he heard voices whispering in languages older than human memory. "Samuel Crow Feather," a new voice called from the tunnel entrance. Not Kane, someone else. Someone whose accent carried the hint of Apache heritage mixed with military precision. "Samuel Crow Feather, son of Maria Two Eagles. Your grandmother's people call to you." A figure emerged from the tunnel, an Apache warrior in traditional dress, but carrying modern weapons. His face was weathered by decades of desert sun, and his eyes held the wisdom of someone who'd walked between two worlds. "Captain Joseph Running Bear," the man said, inclining his head respectfully. "Your brother in blood and spirit." Sam stared at the warrior, understanding flooding through him like a physical force. He'd heard stories of Joseph Running Bear, the Apache scout, who'd served with distinction in the army before returning to his people when he could no longer stomach the government's betrayals. "You're real," Sam said, amazement coloring his voice. "Isabella used to tell stories about you, but I thought that I was a legend." Joseph's smile was sad but warm. "Sometimes legends are the only thing that keep hope alive. But I'm here now, and I didn't come alone." As if summoned by his words, more Apache warriors began emerging from the various tunnels, men and women who moved like shadows armed with both traditional weapons and captured army rifles. They spread out around the chamber with practiced efficiency, preparing for a siege. "How many?" Sam asked. "Enough," Joseph replied. "But Kane has something we didn't expect. Artillery. Howitzers he stole from the Army Depot in Tucson. He means to collapse these tunnels and bury the sacred springs forever if he can't control them." The implications hit Sam like a landslide. Kane wasn't just after Esperanza and the maps. He was planning to destroy the entire underground river system that sustained life across hundreds of miles of desert. "We can't let that happen," Esperanza said fiercely, rising from beside the sacred pool. "These waters, they're not just about healing individual people. The whole ecosystem depends on them. Destroy the springs and the desert dies." Tahoe moved to the edge of the sacred pool, his young face grave with a responsibility beyond his years. "The spirits show me a vision," he said quietly. "A great choice must be made to save the sacred waters. But the choice will change everything." Before anyone could ask what he meant, the sound of approaching boots echoed from multiple tunnels. Kane had found reinforcements, and he was coming from several directions at once. "Positions." Joseph commanded his warriors, fading into defensive positions among the rock formations. "Let them come to us." But Sam was studying the chamber with tactical eyes, noting the way the tunnels converged, the height of the ceiling, the natural choke points. Years of scouting had taught him to read terrain like a book, and what he read here made him think of possibilities that went beyond simple defense. "Joseph," he said slowly, "what would happen if someone collapsed the main entrance tunnel?" "Would trap Kane's force in here with us," Joseph replied, "but also trap us." "Not all of us," Sam said, looking at the 7 passages leading away from the chamber. "Esperanza and Tahoe could escape through one of the other routes while we hold Kane here." "Or no," Esperanza said firmly. "We stay together. That's what Tahoe's vision showed. The 3 of us must face this together." "The boy's safety, the boy is safer here than anywhere else," Tahoe interrupted, his young voice carrying startling authority. "This is where the spirits are strongest. This is where the old promises will be kept." The first of Kane's men appeared at the tunnel entrance, moving cautiously into the phosphorescent glow of the chamber. Behind them came Kane himself, his silver hair gleaming in the strange light, his pale eyes taking in the ancient pictographs and sacred pool with cold calculation. "Magnificent," Kane breathed, stepping into the chamber with his gun drawn. "Absolutely magnificent. Do you have any idea what this place is worth, Crowfeather? The healing properties alone could make a man immortal. Imagine what governments would pay for that kind of power." "Some things aren't for sale, Kane," Sam replied, his Winchester trained on the man's heart. "And some debts can only be paid in blood." Kane's smile was razor thin. "Ah, yes, your departed family. I wondered when you'd work up the courage to face me about that." Tell me, Crow Feather, did they scream when my boys cut them down? Did your little girl call for her daddy to save her? The words hit Sam like physical blows, but instead of rage, he felt a strange calm descend over him. Isabella's voice seemed to whisper in his ear, reminding him of the man she'd fallen in love with, not a killer driven by vengeance, but a protector guided by justice. They died with honor, Sam said quietly. Something you'll never understand. Honor doesn't stop bullets, Crowfeather. And it certainly doesn't. Kane's words were cut off as Tahoe stepped forward, his small figure somehow commanding attention from every person in the chamber. When the boy spoke, his voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate with the living rock around them. Marcus Kane, Tahoe said in perfect English, though his eyes held depths that belonged to someone far older. The spirits of the sacred waters know your true name. They know you were born to the Navajo people, but chose to deny your heritage. They know the children you have killed to hide your shame. Kane's face went pale as death. What the hell? You seek power over life and death, Tahoe continued, his young voice growing stronger. But you are already dead inside. The water spirits will not suffer your touch upon their sacred gift. As the boy spoke, the water in the sacred pool began to glow more brightly, casting dancing shadows on the cavern walls. A low humming seemed to emanate from the rock itself, growing stronger with each word. Enough of this mystical nonsense, Kane snarled, raising his gun toward Tahoe. That's when Sam moved. Chapter 4, The Maps Don't Lie. 3 years of grief and guilt and carefully contained rage exploded into action as Sam threw himself between Kane and the boy. His Winchester spoke once, twice, the shots echoing like thunder in the confined space. Kane staggered backward, crimson spreading across his shoulder, but his own gun was already firing. The bullet caught Sam in the chest, spinning him around and sending him crashing into the rocky wall. Samuel Esperanza's scream echoed through the chamber as she rushed to his side, her own rifle forgotten. But the real battle was just beginning. Kane's men opened fire from the tunnel entrance, while Joseph's warriors returned fire from their concealed positions. The ancient chamber became a battlefield, filled with smoke and the crash of gunfire. Through it all, Tahoe stood calmly beside the sacred pool, his small hands pressed against the water's surface. Where his fingers touched, the glowing liquid ripples spread outward in patterns that seemed to follow some cosmic design. The water remembers, the boy said, his voice somehow audible above the gunfire. It remembers every guardian who has protected it, every sacrifice made in its name, and it chooses to give one last gift to those who would preserve its sacred trust. The glow from the pool intensified, bathing the entire chamber in ethereal light. Kane's men began to stumble, their shots going wide as something in the light itself seemed to disorient them. What's happening to them, Esperanza asked as she pressed cloth against Sam's wounded chest. The water spirits defend their own, Joseph called out, never taking his eyes off the enemy. But this is just the beginning. Kane has more men coming and those howitzers. We need to end this now. Sam struggled to sit up, despite his wound, his mind working furiously through the pain. The bullet had missed his heart by inches, but he was losing blood fast. Around him, the battle raged with increasing intensity, but he could see that Kane's forces were beginning to regroup. The tunnel system, he gasped. If we can reach the other chambers, we can outflank them. You're in no condition to move, Esperanza protested. I'm in no condition to die here either, Sam replied, forcing himself to his feet. Not when there's still work to be done. Tahoe looked up from the sacred pool, his young face glowing with supernatural awareness. The spirits show me the path, he said. But first we must combine the old knowledge with the new. Uncle Samuel showed me the maps from Esperanza's bag. Despite the chaos around them, Sam found himself pulling out the leather-wrapped bundle from Esperanza's saddlebags. The maps were drawn in multiple hands, some clearly Spanish colonial, others bearing the distinctive artwork of various indigenous tribes. But as Tahoe spread them on the ground beside the sacred pool, patterns began to emerge. Look, the boy said, pointing to intersecting lines that crisscrossed the southwest. The Spanish mapped the surface rivers. The Apache marked the hunting grounds. The Navajo showed the sacred places, but none of them alone knew the whole truth. Esperanza knelt beside them, her medical training warring with her need to understand. Diego spent months trying to piece these together. He said they showed something impossible, waterways that flowed uphill, springs that appeared and disappeared with the seasons. Not impossible. Sam realized, his scout's eye beginning to see the pattern. Underground. It's all underground. The sacred springs aren't separate. They're all connected by a single massive aquifer system. Joseph whistled softly from his position among the rocks. If that's true, then Kane's artillery could do more than just collapse these tunnels. He could crack the entire underground river system. The implications were staggering. The network of sacred springs wasn't just spiritually significant, it was the hydrological foundation that made life possible across vast stretches of the American Southwest. Destroy it, and entire communities would face drought and death. "We have to stop him," Esperanza said, but her words were cut off as a new sound echoed through the chamber, the distant boom of artillery being positioned outside the tunnels. Kane's laughter cut through the gunfire like a blade. "You hear that crow feather? That's the sound of progress. In 10 minutes, this entire system will be rubble, and the healing waters will be nothing but legend. Unless we give him what he wants," one of Kane's sergeants called out during a lull in the shooting. "He doesn't want the artifacts," Sam realized, studying Kane's pale eyes across the battlefield of the chamber. "He wants the knowledge. He wants to control the entire network." Tahoe looked up from the maps, his young face suddenly ancient with understanding. "The bad man has the dead-eye sickness," he said quietly. "He wants to live forever, but he's afraid of dying because he knows the spirits will judge him for his crimes." Esperanza's medical training clicked into place. "Consumption," she breathed. "I can see it now, the way he holds himself, the pallor." "He's dying, isn't he?" Kane's bitter laugh confirmed her diagnosis. "Very good, Senora. The doctors in Washington give me 6 months, maybe less. But with access to these healing waters," his eyes grew cold as winter, "I could live long enough to build an empire." The battle resumed with renewed intensity, but now Sam understood the true stakes. This wasn't just about stopping Kane, it was about protecting a natural wonder that could sustain life across the Southwest for generations to come. "Joseph," Sam called out, "can your people reach the surface tunnels if we can disable those howitzers?" "Already on it," Joseph replied. "But we need time, and we need Kane to believe he's winning until the last moment." That's when Esperanza made a decision that would change everything. Standing slowly, she walked toward the center of the chamber, her hands raised in apparent surrender. "Colonel Kane," she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the space. "You want the maps, the artifacts? I'll trade them for safe passage for the boy." "Esperanza, no," Sam started, but she silenced him with a look. "I have something you need," she continued, addressing Kane directly. "The final piece of the puzzle, the location of the true Corazon de Agua, the heart spring that controls all the others." Kane's eyes gleamed with hunger. "You're lying." "Am I?" Esperanza reached into her blouse and pulled out a small vial filled with water that seemed to glow with its own inner light. This came from the source itself. One drop can heal wounds. A mouthful can cure diseases. Imagine what the full spring could do for a dying man. The chamber fell silent except for the distant sound of artillery being positioned. Kane studied Esperanza with the calculating gaze of a man who'd spent his life reading people for weaknesses. "What do you want in return?" "The boy goes free. No harm comes to the indigenous peoples who guard these places. And you withdraw your artillery." Kane's smile was cruel. "And what guarantee do I have that you're telling the truth?" Esperanza looked directly at Sam, and he saw something in her eyes that made his heart skip. She was planning something dangerous. "Because," she said, her voice carrying across the chamber like a prayer, "I'll drink from the true source in front of you. I'll prove its power by healing the wound in my heart, the one that's been killing me slowly since Diego died." Before anyone could stop her, Esperanza raised the vial to her lips and drank deeply. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Light seemed to pour from her skin, and the air around her shimmered with heat that had nothing to do with temperature. When she opened her eyes, they blazed with an inner fire that made everyone in the chamber step back involuntarily. "The healing waters choose their guardians," she said, her voice echoing with harmonics that seemed to come from the earth itself. "And they do not suffer the touch of those who would use their gift for evil." Kane took a step forward, his face twisted with desperate hunger. "Where is it? Where is the source?" Esperanza smiled, and in that smile, Sam saw the spirit of every woman who had ever protected something sacred from those who would defile it. Closer than you think, she said, and farther than you'll ever reach. That's when Tahoe stood up from beside the sacred pool, his small hands glowing with the same inner light that surrounded Esperanza. The spirits have chosen, he announced in a voice that carried the authority of ages. The test begins now. Chapter 5, Blood Moon Rising. What happened next would be spoken of in whispers around Apache fires for generations to come. The water in the sacred pool began to rise, not flooding but ascending, in defiance of gravity itself, forming spirals and streams that danced through the air like living things. The ancient pictographs on the cavern walls blazed to life, telling stories in light and shadow that spoke to the deepest memories of everyone present. Kane's men stopped firing, staring in terror at forces they couldn't understand or fight. But Kane himself fought against the supernatural display, his pale eyes blazing with defiant hatred. "Parlor tricks and savage superstition," he snarled, raising his gun toward Tahoe. "I won't be broken by bait. By shut up by a man." The shot that followed didn't come from Kane's weapon. Sam, despite his wound, had found the strength to raise his Winchester one final time. The bullet took Kane's center mass, sending him stumbling backward toward the sacred pool. But even as he fell, Kane's finger tightened on his trigger. The shot went wide, ricocheting off the chamber walls with a sound like thunder. And in that moment of chaos, something else happened, the sound of howitzers firing from outside the tunnels. "The artillery," Joseph shouted. "He gave the order before we could stop them." The first shells struck the upper tunnels with devastating force. Rock dust rained down from the ceiling, and cracks began to appear in the ancient walls. The carefully balanced structure that had protected the sacred springs for centuries was beginning to collapse. "The network," Sam gasped, understanding the full horror of what was happening. "If this chamber falls, it'll crack the aquifer. The whole system could drain into the earth." Esperanza knelt beside the sacred pool, her hands pressed against the water's surface. The glow that surrounded her intensified, and she began to speak in a language that seemed to blend Spanish Navajo and something far older. "What is she doing?" Joseph called out as more shells struck overhead. "She's trying to protect the springs," Tahoe replied, his young voice steady despite the chaos. "But she can't do it alone. The spirits need all three guardians to work together." Sam struggled to his feet, ignoring the pain in his chest. His Navajo grandmother had told him stories of sacred ceremonies that required the participation of multiple spirits, multiple bloodlines coming together for a common purpose. "Tell me what to do," he said. Tahoe took his hand, then reached for Esperanza's. "Speak the words your grandmother taught you. The old words, the ones you thought were just stories." As the three of them joined hands around the sacred pool, Sam felt something shift in the fundamental nature of reality. The pain from his wound faded, replaced by a warmth that seemed to flow from the water itself. Words came to his lips. Navajo prayers his grandmother had taught him as a child, mixing with Spanish blessings, Esperanza whispered, and Apache songs that Tahoe sang in a voice older than his years. The dancing water around them began to move with purpose, flowing upward through cracks in the ceiling, seeking out and sealing the damage from the artillery strikes. But more than that, the water seemed to be carrying messages connecting this chamber to every other sacred spring in the Mustan underground network. "It's working," Joseph breathed from his position among the rocks. The spirits were protecting the entire system. But their moment of triumph was shattered as Kane, mortally wounded, but not yet dead, pulled himself to the edge of the sacred pool. His pale eyes burned with a hatred that seemed to transcend death itself. "If I can't have it," he gasped, blood foaming at his lips, "then no one can." In his hand was a small explosive device, something he had kept as a final desperate measure. His finger was already on the trigger. "Kane, don't," Sam started, but the explosion was already building. That's when Esperanza did something that would be remembered as the ultimate act of love and sacrifice. She threw herself between Kane and the sacred pool, taking the full force of the explosion, meant to destroy the heart of the water system. The blast threw everyone in the chamber to the ground. When the smoke cleared, Esperanza lay motionless beside the pool, her body shielding the sacred waters from the destructive force that would have poisoned them forever. Kane was gone, his body consumed by his own hatred and desperation. But Esperanza. "No," Sam whispered, crawling toward her broken form. "No, not again." I can't lose another. Tahoe's small hand touched his shoulder. Look, the boy said softly. Look with your heart, not your eyes. As Sam knelt beside Esperanza, he saw that she was still breathing, barely but alive. The explosion had torn through her body, but somehow impossibly the sacred waters were already beginning to heal her wounds. The baby, she whispered, her hand moving to her belly. Strong, Tahoe said with certainty. The child carries the protection of all three bloodlines now. Nothing can harm him. Over the next hours, the artillery fire finally ceased and Joseph's warriors secured the tunnels. Sam watched Esperanza slowly heal before his eyes. The sacred waters didn't just mend her physical wounds. They seemed to repair something deeper, something in her spirit that had been broken since Diego's death. It's over, she said finally, sitting up with Sam's help. Cain is gone and the springs are safe. For now, Joseph said, emerging from the tunnels with news from the surface. But there will be others. There are always others who want to control what should remain free. Sam looked around the sacred chamber at the pictographs that told stories of guardians stretching back through time, at the pool that reflected starlight from openings far above. He thought of Isabella's letter, of Diego's sacrifice, of the choice that lay before all of them. Then we'll be ready, he said quietly. All of us, together. Tahoe smiled, his young face radiant with hope. The water spirits are pleased, he announced. They say the true guardians have finally come home. Chapter 6, The Enemy's Face. As dawn broke over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Sam helped Esperanza to her feet beside the sacred pool. The chamber that had been a battlefield hours before now hummed with peaceful energy, the ancient waters flowing in their eternal patterns. But even as they celebrated their victory, Sam knew that Joseph was right. There would be others who sought to control the sacred springs, others who saw healing waters and thought only of profit and power. What happens to Cain's men? Esperanza asked as they prepared to leave the chamber. Most of them were just soldiers following orders, Joseph replied. Without Cain's gold and threats, they'll likely drift away. But some, he shook his head grimly, some were true believers in his cause. They'll regroup, find new leadership. Sam studied the maps they'd spread beside the sacred pool, seeing now how the entire network connected across hundreds of miles of desert. Each spring, each sacred site was a vital link in a chain that sustained life across the Southwest. We can't protect them all, he said, not with just the three of us. Not just three, Tahoe corrected, his young voice carrying a surprising wisdom. The spirits show me many others coming. People who have lost their way, who need purpose and healing. The sacred waters call to broken hearts, and broken hearts heal best when they help others heal. Esperanza placed her hand on her belly, feeling the strong movements of her unborn child. What kind of world will he grow up in, she wondered aloud. A better one, Sam said with quiet conviction. Because we'll make it better. One person at a time, and one family at a time, one sacred place at a time. As they made their way through the tunnel system back toward the surface, Sam felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years: hope for the future. Not just survival, but the possibility of building something meaningful from the ashes of loss. The sacred waters flowed on, carrying their eternal promise of renewal and healing to all who would receive it. And somewhere in their gentle song, Sam could almost hear Isabella's voice, blessing the choice he was about to make. Chapter 7. Birth and Death. 3 months had passed since the confrontation in the heart chamber, and Thunder Mesa Ranch had been transformed from a place of isolation into something that resembled hope made manifest. The house had been rebuilt and expanded with rooms enough for the growing community that was beginning to gather around the sacred springs. Sam stood on the front porch in the pre-dawn darkness, watching storm clouds gather on the horizon. His chest wound had healed completely, leaving only a thin scar as reminder of that terrible night underground. But the deeper wounds, the ones that had festered in his soul for 3 years, those were finally beginning to mend as well. Inside the house, Esperanza was in labor. The pains had started just after midnight, coming strong and regular, with the kind of intensity that spoke of a child eager to enter the world. Tahoe, now 11 and growing tall for his age, had been attending to her with the calm competence of someone far older than his years. The baby comes with the storm, the boy had announced earlier, his dark eyes holding depths of knowledge that no longer surprised Sam. The water spirits are gathering to bless his arrival. Sam moved to the window of the bedroom where Esperanza labored, watched over by an elderly Navajo woman named Sophie Whispering Rain, who had arrived 2 weeks ago with 3 orphan children and a lifetime of healing knowledge. The old woman had taken one look at the sacred springs and declared herself ready to serve as midwife to whatever children the water spirits chose to bless. "How is she?" Sam asked quietly. "Strong," Sophie replied without looking up from her work. "This child carries the protection of many bloodlines. He will be born healthy, but—" She paused, her weathered face growing thoughtful. "The spirits whisper of choices ahead. Great choices that will determine the path of many lives." Through the window, Sam could see the first drops of rain beginning to fall, each one catching the pre-dawn light like tiny stars. In the distance, lightning flickered across the desert, illuminating the cottonwoods that bent like dancers in the wind. "Samuel," Esperanza's voice called from the bed, tight with pain but still strong. "Come here." Sam moved to her and taking her hand as another contraction swept through her. Her grip was fierce, anchoring her to the world as she rode the waves of labor. "Tell me about Isabella," she gasped during a brief respite. "Tell me about the first time you saw her." Sam's throat tightened. For 3 years, he'd avoided talking about Isabella, afraid that speaking of her would somehow diminish the precious memories. But now, with Esperanza's hand in his and new life struggling to enter the world, the words came easily. "It was in Tucson," he said, his voice soft with memory. "She was arguing with a horse trader who was trying to cheat an old Apache woman. Isabella didn't speak Apache and the woman didn't speak Spanish, but somehow they understood each other perfectly. When I offered to translate, Isabella looked at me and said, 'Some conversations don't need words. They need hearts that listen.'" Esperanza smiled through her pain. "She sounds like someone I would have loved." "She would have loved you too," Sam replied, and realized it was true. Isabella had always believed that love multiplied when it was shared, that families grew stronger by including rather than excluding. Another contraction, stronger than the others, made Esperanza cry out. Sophie moved with efficient grace, checking her progress with hands that had delivered hundreds of babies over her long life. "Soon now," the old woman announced. "The child is eager to meet his family." Outside, the storm was intensifying. Rain drummed against the windows with increasing force, and thunder rolled across the desert like the voices of ancient spirits. Tahoe appeared in the doorway, his young face grave with responsibility. "The water spirits are singing," he announced. "They say this child will be a bridge between all worlds, Navajo, Mexican, Apache, and the others who will come. They say he will grow up to teach people how to listen to the voices that speak without words." "What will you name him?" Sophie asked as Esperanza entered the final stages of labor. "Gabriel Diego Crow." "Feather," Esperanza replied without hesitation, "for the messenger of God, for his father who died protecting the sacred places, and for the man who will raise him with love." The final hour of labor was intense but not difficult. As the storm reached its peak outside, with lightning splitting the sky and thunder shaking the very foundations of the house, Gabriel Diego Crowfeather entered the world with a cry that seemed to harmonize with the voice of the wind itself. Sophie placed the baby in Esperanza's arms, her ancient face creased with joy. "Perfect," she announced, "strong and healthy, with the mark of the water spirits upon him." Sam leaned over to look at his new son, for that's what Gabriel was now, regardless of blood, and felt his heart expand in ways he'd thought impossible. The baby was beautiful, with Diego's dark hair and Esperanza's delicate features. But there was something else, something that reminded Sam of the first time he'd seen the sacred springs glow with inner light. "Hello, little one," Sam whispered, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny hand. "Welcome to the world." Gabriel's eyes opened at the sound of Sam's voice, and for a moment they stared at each other in the lamplight. In those dark depths, Sam saw intelligence and awareness that seemed far older than the few minutes the child had been breathing. "He knows you," Esperanza said softly. "He knows his father." Tahoe approached the bed carefully, his young face filled with wonder. "May I bless him in the old way?" Esperanza nodded, and Tahoe placed his small hand gently on Gabriel's forehead. For a moment, the room seemed to fill with the same phosphorescent light they'd seen in the heart chamber. "The spirits bless this child," Tahoe said in Navajo, then switched to English. "They say he will be a healer of divisions, a builder of bridges, and a keeper of the sacred trust that guards life itself." As if responding to the blessing, Gabriel made soft sounds that seemed almost like words. When Sam touched the baby's cheek, he felt a warmth that had nothing to do with body heat, a sense of purpose and belonging that he'd been missing for 3 years. Outside, the storm was beginning to weaken, but the rain continued to fall in gentle sheets that would bring life to the desert plants and refill the natural basins that collected water for the dry seasons ahead. "Look," Tahoe said suddenly, pointing toward the window. Sam turned to see the most beautiful rainbow he'd ever witnessed as a stretching across the storm-washed sky. But this wasn't an ordinary rainbow. The colors seemed deeper, more vivid, and they appeared to be emanating from the direction of the sacred springs. "The water spirits celebrate," Sophie explained, her voice filled with ancient knowledge. "A new guardian has been born, one who will help protect the sacred places for generations to come." As Sam held his new family close, he thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, the loss and grief that had nearly destroyed him, the arrival of Esperanza and Tahoe that had awakened his true purpose, the battle against Cain that had tested their courage and commitment. All of it had led to this, a new beginning, a new hope, a new life that would grow up knowing his heritage and understanding the sacred trust that had been passed down through generations. "Thank you," Sam whispered to the storm, addressing Isabella Diego and all the spirits who watched over them. "Thank you for bringing us together, for showing us the way forward." The rainbow continued to arc across the sky as the new family rested in the aftermath of birth and miracle, while the sacred waters of Thunder Mesa sang their eternal song of life and renewal. Chapter 8. The Sacred Springs. 2 weeks after Gabriel's birth, Sam stood beside the Sacred Heart Springs at dawn, watching Tahoe teach a small group of children the morning water blessing. The boy who had arrived, broken and starving 11 months ago, had grown into a confident young teacher, his connection to the spirit world now serving as a bridge between the ancient ways and the growing community. The children gathered around Tahoe came from various backgrounds: Apache orphans whose families had been killed in raids, Mexican children whose parents had died from disease, even a few Anglo youngsters whose families had been destroyed by violence or poverty. Each had found their way to Thunder Mesa Ranch through word-of-mouth networks that seemed to operate on their own mysterious logic. "Remember," Tahoe was saying in his careful English, "the water gives life freely, but it asks us to give back in service to others." "What do we give?" "Protection," called out Maria, a 7-year-old Apache girl whose parents had died in a cavalry attack. "We protect the sacred places." "Healing," added James, a 9-year-old boy whose Anglo parents had been killed by bandits near Tombstone. "We help others heal like we were healed." "Teaching," said little Rosa, a 6-year-old Mexican girl whose grandmother had died of fever, leaving her alone in the world. "We teach the old Bowie so they don't get lost." Sam smiled as he listened to the children recite lessons that blended practical knowledge with spiritual wisdom. Under Tahoe's guidance, they were learning not just reading and arithmetic, but also traditional healing methods, desert survival skills, and the kind of cross-cultural understanding that might someday heal the divisions that plagued the Southwest. Papa Sam, Gabriel's cry, interrupted his thoughts as Esperanza approached with their son in her arms. At 2 weeks old, Gabriel was already showing signs of the alertness and awareness that seemed to run in children blessed by the sacred waters. His dark eyes tracked movement with unusual focus, and he seemed to calm whenever he was near the springs. "How did the morning lesson go?" Esperanza asked, settling beside Sam on the bench he'd built overlooking the water. "Good. Tahoe's becoming quite the teacher. The children adore him, and he has a gift for making complex ideas simple enough for young minds to grasp." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the children complete their morning ritual by each taking a small sip from the sacred springs. It was a ceremony Tahoe had developed, blending Navajo tradition with elements from other cultures represented in their growing community. "Joseph sent word yesterday," Esperanza said eventually. "The territorial government is finally taking notice of what we're building here." Sam's expression grew cautious. "Good notice or bad notice?" "Both, probably. There are officials who see Thunder Mesa Academy as a model for peaceful integration between different peoples. But there are others who view any celebration of indigenous culture as a threat to territorial authority. And which side is winning? Hard to say, but Joseph thinks we have a window of opportunity, maybe 6 months to a year, to establish ourselves firmly enough that it would be politically difficult to shut us down. Sam nodded, understanding the delicate balance they were trying to maintain. The academy needed official recognition to protect the children and secure resources, but that same recognition could invite the kind of government interference that had destroyed so many indigenous communities. "We'll need more teachers," he said finally. "Certified instructors who can handle the academic requirements the territorial government expects." "I've been corresponding with educators in Santa Fe and Tucson," Esperanza replied. "There are teachers interested in our methods, people who believe that education should honor all cultures rather than trying to erase them." Before Sam could respond, a commotion from the direction of the main road caught their attention. A small group of riders was approaching, not soldiers this time, but civilians. As they drew closer, Sam recognized the lead rider, Dr. Catherine Morrison, a physician from Tucson, who had corresponded with Esperanza about the healing properties of the sacred springs. "Dr. Morrison," Esperanza called out as the group dismounted, "what brings you to Thunder Mesa?" The middle-aged woman looked tired from her journey, but her eyes were bright with professional interest. "I've come to see for myself whether the stories are true," she said without preamble, "about healing waters and children who thrive despite everything they've lost." Sam and Esperanza exchanged glances. They'd been careful about publicizing the more miraculous aspects of the sacred springs, knowing that too much attention could bring unwanted scrutiny. But word had apparently spread anyway. "What stories?" Sam asked carefully. "Stories of children who arrived malnourished and traumatized only to recover completely within weeks. Stories of broken bones that healed without deformity, of fevers that broke overnight, of wounds that closed without scarring." De Morrison's voice carried professional skepticism, but also hope. "If even half of what I've heard is true, this place could revolutionize medicine." Tahoe approached from the springs, his wet feet leaving tracks in the sand. The boy studied Dr. Morrison with the intense gaze he reserved for strangers, as if reading something in her spirit that others couldn't see. "She has healing hands," he announced in his matter-of-fact way. "The water spirits approve of her. She can be trusted with some of the truth, but not all of it." But Morrison stared at the boy in amazement. "How did you know I was a physician?" "The same way I know you've been dreaming of water for the past month," Tahoe replied with a slight smile. "The spirits speak to those who are meant to serve." Over the next 3 days, Dr. Morrison stayed at Thunder Mesa Ranch, observing the children's education and documenting what she witnessed with scientific precision. She was particularly interested in the integrated curriculum that Tahoe and the adult teachers had developed, lessons that combined traditional academic subjects with indigenous knowledge about healing agriculture and spiritual practices. "This is remarkable," she told Sam and Esperanza on her final evening. "You're not just educating these children, you're healing them from trauma that should have taken years to overcome." "Children are resilient when they feel safe and loved," Esperanza replied diplomatically. "It's more than that," Dr. Morrison insisted. "I've examined some of these children. Malnutrition damage that should be permanent has completely reversed. Psychological trauma that should require extensive treatment has simply disappeared." She looked toward the sacred springs, where the water caught the last light of day like liquid silver. "There's something about this place, isn't there? Something that goes beyond conventional healing." Sam followed her gaze, weighing his words carefully. De Morrison seemed genuinely committed to helping children, but the sacred springs held secrets that needed to be protected from those who might exploit them. "There are things in this world that science hasn't learned to measure yet," he said finally. "Well, for instance, hope, the healing power of belonging to something larger than yourself. In water that glows in the moonlight and seems to respond to human emotion," Dr. Morrison added with a slight smile. Sam and Esperanza exchanged another look. Apparently the doctor was more observant than they'd realized. "Some gifts are too precious to be dissected," Tahoe said, appearing at Dr. Morrison's elbow with the silent grace that sometimes startled adults. "But they can be shared with those who understand their true value." "And what is their true value?" Dr. Morrison asked the boy seriously. "Healing the divisions between people," Tahoe replied without hesitation. "Showing that different cultures can learn from each other instead of fighting. Teaching children to see with hearts that listen instead of eyes that judge." Dr. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, watching the children from various backgrounds play together beside the glowing springs. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of decision. "I'd like to help," she said, "not to study your water or publish papers about miraculous healings, but to help you protect what you've built here, to make sure the territorial government sees Thunder Mesa Academy as something worth preserving. What did you have in mind? Sam asked. Official medical documentation of the children's health and development. Educational assessments that prove your methods are producing exceptional results. Political connections that can provide protection when opponents try to shut you down. Sam looked at Esperanza, then at Tahoe, seeing his own thoughts reflected in their eyes. They needed allies in the outside world, people who could help bridge the gap between Thunder Mesa Academy and the territorial authorities who would ultimately determine its fate. On one condition, Esperanza said finally, the sacred springs themselves remain off-limits to medical study. Some mysteries are meant to stay mysterious. Dr. Morrison nodded slowly. Agreed. I hate him. I'm a physician, not an explorer. My interest is in helping children heal, not in solving supernatural puzzles. As the sun set over Thunder Mesa Ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Sam felt a deep sense of satisfaction settle over him. The community they were building here was growing stronger, attracting the kind of people who could help it thrive while protecting its essential character. Gabriel stirred in Esperanza's arms, making soft sounds that seemed almost like words. When Sam looked down at his son, he could have sworn the baby was smiling at the sacred springs, as if he already understood the role they would play in his life. What do you think, little one? Sam whispered, ready to help change the world. The baby's response was a gurgle of contentment that sounded remarkably like agreement. Chapter 9, The Final Hunt. 6 months after Dr. Morrison's first visit, Thunder Mesa Academy had grown from a family refuge into a recognized educational institution. The territorial government had granted them provisional status as an experimental school, allowing them to receive federal funding in exchange for regular inspections and progress reports. But success brought new challenges. Sam stood in his expanded office, reading a letter that had arrived with the morning mail. The official seal of the United States Army made his stomach clench with old fears, but the contents were even more disturbing than he had expected. What is it? Esperanza asked, entering with Gabriel on her hip. At 6 months old, their son was growing strong and alert, his dark eyes already showing the kind of awareness that marked children blessed by the sacred waters. New orders from Fort Huachuca, Sam replied, setting the letter aside with carefully controlled anger. They're sending a cultural assessment team to evaluate our educational methods, led by a captain, William Sherman Kane's former second-in-command. Esperanza's face went pale. Kane had a second-in-command. According to this, Sherman was away on recruitment duty when Kane died. Now he's been promoted and assigned to investigate irregularities in territorial education programs. Sam's voice carried all the frustration and worry he felt. 3 guesses which program tops his list. Tahoe appeared in the doorway, his now 12-year-old frame beginning to show the height he would achieve as a man, but his eyes still held the spiritual depth that had marked him since childhood, and right now they were dark with concern. The water spirits are troubled, he announced without preamble. They show me visions of the dead-eye sickness spreading. Kane's hatred didn't die with him, it infected others. What kind of visions? Esperanza asked, settling Gabriel in his cradle by the window. Soldiers coming with papers and chains. Men who see our children and think only of the money they could make by scattering them to boarding schools in the East. A captain with Kane's cold eyes and a heart full of the same poison. Sam felt his old scout instincts sharpened to deadly focus. For 6 months, they'd been building something beautiful at Thunder Mesa Academy, a community where children from different cultures learned together, where traditional knowledge was valued alongside academic learning, where healing happened through understanding rather than forced assimilation. Now that peace was being threatened by the ghost of Kane's ambitions. When are they coming, though? He asked. Tomorrow, Tahoe replied, but not alone. The spirits show me others, men in expensive suits who smell of cities and speak of progress. They want to buy the land drain. The springs build something that serves their profit instead of the people. The implications hit Sam like a physical blow. A military assessment combined with civilian investors could only mean one thing: someone was planning to shut down Thunder Mesa Academy and exploit the sacred springs for commercial purposes. We need to send word to Joseph, Esperanza said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. And to Dr. Morrison, if we're going to fight this, we'll need allies. Messages have already been sent, Tahoe said with a quiet confidence that had grown with his years. Joseph rides here with 3 of his best warriors. Dr. Morrison comes from Tucson with territorial officials who support our work. And he paused, his young face lighting up with something that might have been mischief. And some of our former students are coming home. Sam raised an eyebrow. Former students, the older children who graduated last year and went to work in Tucson and Phoenix. They heard about the trouble coming, and they're bringing friends, newspaper reporters, territorial legislators, even a photographer who wants to document what we've built here. For the first time since reading the Army letter, Sam felt hope beginning to kindle in his chest. They'd spent 6 years building Thunder Mesa Academy, not just as a school, but as a living demonstration that different cultures could thrive together. Now it seemed that their former students were ready to defend what they'd helped create. "How long do we have to prepare?" Esperanza asked. "Captain Sherman and his team arrive tomorrow afternoon," Sam replied, checking his pocket watch. "But according to Tahoe's visions, they're not planning to make their move immediately. They want to gather evidence, first document what they call irregularities in our program. Then we give them evidence," Esperanza said with determination. "Evidence that Thunder Mesa Academy produces exceptional citizens who can bridge cultural divides and serve the territory better than any traditional school." Tahoe's smile was radiant. "The water spirits approve of this plan. They say truth has its own power stronger than fear or hatred." The next afternoon, Captain William Sherman arrived at Thunder Mesa Ranch with a military escort and 3 civilian inspectors. Sam watched from the front porch as a small convoy approached. Noting the way Sherman sat his horse rigid and controlling, with the same cold calculation that had marked his former commander. But Sam also noticed something else, a group of riders approaching from the east, Joseph Running Bear, and his warriors arriving exactly as Tahoe had predicted. And from the south, another group that made Sam's heart lift with pride, 6 young adults in their late teens and early 20s, former students of Thunder Mesa Academy, returning to defend their alma mater. "Captain Sherman," Sam called out as the military party dismounted. "Welcome to Thunder Mesa Academy. I'm Samuel Crow Feather, director of the institution." Sherman was younger than Kane had been, perhaps 35, with the same pale eyes and rigid bearing that spoke of a man who saw the world in terms of control and submission. He studied Sam with obvious distaste, his gaze lingering on the Navajo jewelry Sam wore and the mixed group of children who had gathered to watch the arrival. "Mr. Crow Feather," Sherman replied, his voice clipped and official. "I'm here on orders from Territorial Command to assess the educational standards and cultural appropriateness of this facility. Of course, we're happy to cooperate with any official inspection." Sam's voice remained calm and welcoming, though every instinct screamed danger. "Would you like to begin with a tour of our classrooms?" "That won't be necessary just yet," Sherman said, his attention already shifting to the children. "I'm more interested in interviewing the students privately, to ensure they're receiving proper American education rather than," he gestured dismissively toward the sacred springs, "primitive superstitions." Tahoe stepped forward from the group of children, his 12-year-old frame somehow commanding respect despite his youth. "Captain Sherman," he said in perfect English, his voice carrying the formal politeness he'd learned in Sam's diplomacy lessons. "May I ask what qualifications you have to evaluate educational programs?" Sherman's face flushed with anger. "I don't answer to children, especially Native children," Tahoe finished calmly. "Sir, I can recite the Constitution from memory, perform mathematics at a high school level, speak 4 languages fluently, and explain the geological processes that create underground river systems. Can you—" Before Sherman could respond, one of the civilian inspectors, a heavy-set man in an expensive suit, cleared his throat loudly. "Perhaps we should focus on the matter at hand. I'm Theodore Blackwood, representing certain investment interests. We understand this facility sits on valuable water rights." Sam felt his blood turn to ice. The Sacred Heart Springs have been protected by treaty since before territorial status was established. They're not available for commercial development. "Treaties can be renegotiated," Blackwood said with an oily smile, "especially when facilities built on treaty land fail to meet federal educational standards." The threat was clear now. Shut down the school, void the treaty protections, and claim the water rights for commercial exploitation. It was Kane's plan carried out by his successors. "Gentlemen," a new voice called from behind them, Dr. Morrison approached with a group that included 2 territorial legislators, a federal education inspector, and a man with a large camera who could only be the photographer Tahoe had mentioned. "I hope we're not too late for the assessment." Sherman's expression grew thunderous. "This is a military inspection, not a public spectacle." "Actually," said one of the legislators, a distinguished man in his 50s, "any facility receiving federal education funding is subject to civilian oversight as well as military review. I'm Senator Martinez, chairman of the Territorial Education Committee." The balance of power shifted visibly as more allies arrived. Joseph Running Bear and his warriors took positions around the ranch, not threatening but clearly protective. The former students of Thunder Mesa Academy gathered near the sacred springs, ready to testify about their education. And the photographer began setting up his equipment, documenting everything for posterity. "Perhaps we should proceed with a proper tour," Dr. Morrison suggested smoothly. "I'm sure Captain Sherman and Mr. Blackwood would be interested in seeing our exceptional results firsthand." What followed was 3 hours of the most comprehensive educational demonstrations Sam had ever witnessed. The children of Thunder Mesa Academy performed with a skill and confidence that left even the hostile inspectors struggling to find fault. Maria, now 8 years old, demonstrated her bilingual literacy by reading passages from both Cervantes and Mark Twain. James recited the Gettysburg Address, then followed it with a traditional Apache prayer that spoke of unity and shared purpose. Little Rosa explained the mathematics behind water management systems, using examples from both modern engineering and ancient Puebloan techniques. But it was Tahoe who truly showcased the Academy's unique approach. The 12-year-old led a discussion about territorial history that included perspectives from Navajo, Apache, Mexican, and Anglo sources, showing how the same events look different depending on cultural viewpoint, but how understanding all perspectives led to wisdom rather than division. "Impressive," Senator Martinez murmured to Sam as they watched Tahoe field questions from the civilian inspectors. "This boy has a better grasp of constitutional law than most adults." "He's had excellent teachers," Sam replied, "both here at the Academy and from his own cultural traditions." "And the others, are they all at this level?" "Each child develops according to their own gifts and interests," Esperanza said, joining the conversation with a Gabriel sleeping peacefully in her arms. "But yes, our graduation rates and post-secondary success are exceptional." Sherman had grown increasingly agitated as the day progressed, clearly frustrated by his inability to find obvious deficiencies in the Academy's program. Now he played his final card. "Educational results aside," he announced loudly, "this facility promotes divisive cultural practices that undermine American unity. These children are being taught to value primitive traditions over civilized progress." "Which traditions specifically concern you, Captain?" Dr. Morrison asked with professional calm. "This obsession with water spirits and healing springs, superstitious nonsense that has no place in a federally funded institution." Tahoe looked up from his discussion with the inspectors, his young face serious but unafraid. "Captain Sherman, may I ask about your own heritage?" "My heritage is irrelevant to this discussion." "Is it?" Tahoe's voice carried the quiet authority he'd developed over years of spiritual guidance. "Because the water spirits tell me you carry Apache blood from your grandmother's line. They remember her, a woman named Blue Moon Dancing, who was taken from her people when she was 7 years old and forced to forget everything she'd ever known about healing and harmony." Sherman went pale as death. "That's impossible. You couldn't know." "The water remembers everything, Captain. Every person who has ever knelt beside these springs. Every child who was stolen from their family. Every grandmother who died speaking her true name instead of the English name they gave her in the boarding schools." The silence that followed was profound. Even Blackwood seemed shaken by the weight of truth in the boy's words. "Your grandmother never forgot the sacred ways," Tahoe continued gently. "She taught them to your mother in secret, and your mother whispered them to you when you were too young to understand. Part of you still remembers the songs she sang, the stories she told about water that heals and connects all living things." Tears were streaming down Sherman's face now, years of suppressed memory and denied heritage flooding back like a dam breaking. "She used to sing to me," he whispered. "When I had nightmares, she would sing about rivers that carried messages between worlds." "Those songs are still here," Tahoe said, gesturing toward the sacred springs. "The water spirits keep them alive for anyone brave enough to remember who they really are." What happened next would be talked about in territorial circles for years to come. Captain William Sherman, career military officer and representative of federal authority, knelt beside the Sacred Heart Springs and wept for the grandmother he had been taught to forget, the heritage he'd been forced to deny, and the children he'd been sent to scatter, like his own people had been scattered generations before. When he finally stood, his face was different, softer, more human, carrying the peace that came from remembering one's true name. "This assessment is complete," he announced to his bewildered staff. "Thunder Mesa Academy exceeds all federal standards for educational excellence and cultural sensitivity. I recommend continued funding and expanded support." Blackwood sputtered protests about water rights and investment opportunities, but without military backing, his threats carried no weight. The territorial legislators had seen enough to ensure that Thunder Mesa Academy would receive full protection under territorial law. As the various official parties departed, Sam found himself standing beside the sacred springs with his extended family, Esperanza and Gabrielle Tahome, and the children Joseph and his warriors Dr. Morrison and the other allies who had come to their defense. "It's over," Esperanza asked, hardly daring to believe their victory. "This threat is over," Joseph replied. "But there will be others. There are always others who seek to control what should remain free." "Then we'll be ready," Sam said, looking around at the community they'd built. "All of us, together." Tahoe smiled, his young face radiant with hope and determination. "The water spirits are pleased," he announced. "They say the true guardians have finally learned to work as one people regardless of the color of their skin or the language of their prayers." As the sun set over Thunder Mesa Ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Sam realized that they'd done more than just save their school. They'd proven that healing was possible not just for individuals, but for entire communities wounded by centuries of division and mistrust. The sacred waters continued their eternal song, carrying promises of renewal and hope to all who would listen. And in that song, Sam could hear the voices of all who had come before Isabella and Diego, his grandmother, and Tahoe's ancestors, Sherman's forgotten grandmother, and countless others who had dreamed of a day when different peoples could live together in harmony. That day had finally begun to dawn. Chapter 10. After the storm, 2 years after Captain Sherman's unexpected conversion, Thunder Mesa Academy had become a beacon of hope that drew visitors from across the Southwest and beyond. The school now housed 43 children from diverse backgrounds, taught by a faculty that included both traditionally trained teachers and indigenous knowledge keepers. Sam stood in the expanded main building watching Tahoe, now 14, and serving as the Academy's cultural liaison, lead a group of visiting educators through the integration of traditional and modern learning methods. The boy had grown tall and confident, his spiritual gifts now balanced with practical leadership skills that made him invaluable in bridging different educational philosophies. The key, Tahoe was explaining to the fascinated visitors, is understanding that different ways of knowing can complement rather than compete with each other. Scientific observation and spiritual insight often arrive at the same truths through different paths. Dr. Morrison, who had become the Academy's official medical advisor, nodded approvingly. "We've documented remarkable improvements in both academic performance and psychological well-being when children are encouraged to honor their cultural heritage while mastering mainstream subjects." And Gabriel, now 2 years old, toddled between the adults with the fearless curiosity that marked children raised in the protective embrace of the sacred waters. His vocabulary was already impressive, switching effortlessly between English, Spanish, and Navajo, depending on which adult he was addressing. "Papa Sam," he said, tugging on Sam's shirt with one hand while pointing toward the window with the other. "Big horses coming." Sam looked outside to see a familiar sight, Joseph Running Bear approaching with a small group of riders. But these weren't warriors coming to defend the Academy. Instead, they appeared to be families with children and household goods loaded onto pack animals. "More refugees?" Esperanza asked, joining Sam at the window. At 29, she had grown into her role as the Academy's co-director. Her natural teaching abilities, enhanced by formal training, Dr. Morrison had helped arrange. "Looks like it," Sam replied. Joseph said there were Apache families being displaced by the new mining operations near Globe. Maybe some of them decided to seek shelter here. Over the past 2 years, Thunder Mesa Academy had evolved beyond its original purpose as a school. It had become a refuge for families displaced by the ongoing conflicts and economic disruptions that plagued the territory. Some came seeking education for their children. Others arrived wounded in body or spirit, drawn by stories of healing waters in communities that welcomed rather than judged. As Joseph's group approached the main building, Sam could see that these families had indeed traveled far and suffered much. The adults moved with the careful wariness of people who had learned to expect hostility, while the children clung close to their parents with eyes that had seen too much hardship. "Joseph," Sam called out as the Apache leader dismounted. "What brings you to us today?" "Necessity," Joseph replied grimly. "The mining companies have been granted expanded claims near our reservation. Families who refuse to relocate have been encouraged to leave by less than gentle means." Sam's jaw tightened. Despite territorial laws protecting indigenous rights, enforcement remained sporadic at best. Mining interests carried significant political weight, and Apache families often found themselves with little recourse when their traditional lands were declared essential for territorial development. "How many families," Esperanza asked, already moving toward the supply shed where they kept emergency provisions? 12 adults, 18 children," Joseph replied. "All healthy, but they have been traveling for 6 days with limited supplies. The children especially need care." "We have room," Sam said without hesitation. "The new dormitory isn't completely finished, but we can make arrangements." Tahoe appeared at Sam's elbow, having concluded his presentation to the visiting educators. "The water spirits have been expecting them," he said with quiet certainty. "They showed me visions 3 nights ago, new children who would bring gifts of traditional crafts and storytelling." Over the next several hours, Thunder Mesa Academy transformed once again as it welcomed its newest residents. The Apache families were provided with temporary housing in the partially completed dormitory, while the children were gently integrated into existing educational activities. Sam was particularly struck by one family, a grandmother named Agnes Tallpine, who had lost her son and daughter-in-law to illness, leaving her to care for 3 grandchildren, ranging in age from 6 to 12. Despite her advanced years and obvious grief, Agnes carried herself with the dignity and strength that mark true survivors. "Your school has a good reputation among our people," she told Sam as they watched her grandchildren playing with other academy students beside the sacred springs. "They say children come here broken and leave whole." "We try to create an environment where healing can happen naturally," Sam replied. "But the real credit goes to the children themselves. They're remarkably resilient when they feel safe and valued." Agnes nodded, her weathered face thoughtful. "My grandchildren have seen too much violence, too much loss. Their spirits need time to remember how to trust." "They'll have that time here," Esperanza assured her, approaching with Gabriel on her hip. "And they'll have the chance to learn alongside children from many different backgrounds. Sometimes the best healing comes from discovering you're not alone in your struggles." As evening approached, the entire academy community gathered for the welcoming ceremony that had become tradition whenever new families arrived. The ritual blended elements from various cultures represented at the school: Apache blessing songs, Mexican gratitude prayers, Navajo harmony chants, and Anglo expressions of community solidarity. Tahoe led the ceremony, his maturing voice carrying across the gathering as he spoke in multiple languages about the sacred responsibility of caring for those who sought shelter and the strength that came from diversity unified by common purpose. "The water spirits teach us that all rivers eventually flow toward the same sea," he said, his words translated by various community members for those who needed it. Different paths, different languages, different customs, but all seeking the same destination of peace and belonging. Agnes Tallpine stepped forward during the ceremony, her voice strong despite her years. "I have lived through many changes in this land," she said in accented English. "I have seen war and peace, hatred and love, despair and hope. But I have never seen anything like what you have built here, a place where the old ways and new ways dance together instead of fighting." She reached into her traveling bag and pulled out a beautifully crafted medicine bundle, its leather wrapping decorated with beadwork that spoke of countless hours of careful labor. "This belonged to my son," she continued, her voice thick with emotion. "He was a healer, a keeper of traditional knowledge. Before he died, he made me promise to find someone worthy to carry on his work." Agnes walked to where Sam and Esperanza stood with Tahoe and Gabriel, her steps deliberate and ceremonial. "I believe I have found those people," she said, offering the bundle to them. "Not one person, but a family, a community that understands healing comes in many forms." Sam accepted the bundle with reverent hands, feeling the weight of responsibility and honor it represented. "We'll treasure this gift and the knowledge it contains." "More than that," Agnes said with a slight smile. "You'll use it. My grandchildren will learn the old healing ways alongside the new medicine your Dr. Morrison teaches. They'll grow up knowing that all paths to wellness have value when they're guided by wisdom and compassion." As the ceremony concluded and families began moving toward their evening routines, Sam found himself once again standing beside the sacred springs with his core family. The water reflected starlight like scattered diamonds, its gentle song carrying the voices of all who had found refuge and renewal beside its banks. 43 children now, Esperanza mused, watching Gabriel splash his tiny hands in the shallow water at the spring's edge. "When we started, I never imagined it would grow this large." "Or this important," Tahoe added, his teenage voice beginning to carry the depth that would mark his adult years. "The spirits show me visions of other communities looking to Thunder Mesa as a model. People in different territories, different states, trying to build their own bridges between cultures." Sam nodded, understanding the larger significance of what they'd accomplished. Thunder Mesa Academy wasn't just saving individual children, it was proving that integration and mutual respect were possible even in a region torn by centuries of conflict and mistrust. "What do you see in the long term?" he asked Tahoe. "What do the spirits say about our future?" Tahoe was quiet for a long moment, his young face serious as he gazed into the glowing waters. "I see many changes coming," he said finally. "Statehood for the territory, railroads and telegraph lines, towns growing into cities, the old ways of life disappearing as new ones take their place. And Thunder Mesa Academy, growing, changing, adapting." Tahoe's smile was radiant with certainty, but never losing its heart. "The sacred waters will call to broken spirits for as long as the earth exists, and there will always be guardians ready to answer that call." Gabriel chose that moment to gurgle happily and splash both hands in the spring, sending droplets of phosphorescent water sparkling through the night air. His laughter echoed across the water, pure and joyful, carrying the promise of hope to all who heard it. "Listen," Esperanza whispered, her voice filled with wonder. Sam listened, and beneath Gabriel's laughter, he could hear something else, the voices of all the children who had found healing at Thunder Mesa Academy, singing in harmony with the eternal song of the sacred waters. Apache children and Mexican children and Anglo children and others from backgrounds he was still learning about, all united by the simple truth that love multiplied when it was shared. The storm that had brought Esperanza to his door 3 years ago seemed like a lifetime ago. The grief and isolation that had nearly destroyed him felt like memories from another man's life. In their place was purpose, community, and a love that encompassed not just his immediate family, but dozens of children who called him Papa Sam and looked to him for guidance and protection. "Thank you," he whispered to the night, addressing Isabella and Diego and all the spirits who had guided them to this moment. "Thank you for showing us that endings can become beginnings, that loss can transform into love, and that the most broken hearts often grow strong enough to heal the world." The sacred waters sang their eternal song of renewal and hope, carrying Sam's gratitude into the vast network of underground rivers that connected all life across the Southwest. And somewhere in that song, he could swear he heard Isabella's voice blessing the family he'd built from love and loss, the community he'd nurtured from the ashes of his former life. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to serve as guardians of the sacred trust that protected life itself. But tonight, surrounded by his family and the children who had become his legacy, Sam Crowfeather was finally completely home. 10 years hence, 1897. The morning sun painted Thunder Mesa Academy in shades of gold as Samuel Crowfeather stood on the expanded porch of what had once been a simple ranch house. Below him, the courtyard buzzed with activity as nearly 100 children of various ages and backgrounds prepared for their daily lessons. Tahoe, now 24, and serving as the academy's principal, led a group of younger teachers in morning planning beside the sacred springs. His voice carried clearly across the water as he discussed the integration of new territorial education requirements with traditional knowledge preservation. "Remember," he was saying to the diverse group of educators, We're not choosing between the old ways and the new ways. We're creating a third path that honors both while serving our children's real needs. Sam smiled as he watched his adopted son guide the teachers through complex philosophical questions with the same spiritual insight that had marked him since childhood. Tahoe had grown into a remarkable leader, his gifts now enhanced by formal education at the Territorial University, while remaining grounded in the wisdom of his ancestors. Papa Sam, a familiar voice called from the corral, where 12-year-old Gabriel was working with a group of students on animal husbandry. Sam's youngest son had inherited his mother's healing touch with animals and his father's natural leadership abilities, making him popular with students and faculty alike. The delegation from New Mexico Territory just arrived, Gabriel announced. And Mama Esperanza says to tell you the photographer from Harper's Weekly is here too. Sam felt his chest swell with pride, mixed with nervous anticipation. Today marked the 10-year anniversary of Thunder Mesa Academy's founding, and the celebration had drawn visitors from across the Southwest and beyond. Territorial legislators, federal education officials, newspaper reporters, and representatives from indigenous communities had all come to witness what many considered the most successful integration program in the American West. Senor Crowfeather, a cultured voice called from the road. Sam turned to see a distinguished gentleman in his 50s approaching, flanked by several other well-dressed officials. I'm Governor Thornton from New Mexico Territory. I've been looking forward to meeting the man who proved that cultural cooperation isn't just possible, it's profitable. Sam stepped down from the porch to greet the delegation, noting the mix of curiosity and respect in their expressions. Over the past decade, Thunder Mesa Academy had gained a reputation that extended far beyond Arizona territory. Their graduates consistently outperformed students from traditional schools, while their integration methods had been studied and replicated across the region. Governor Thornton, Sam replied, inclining his head respectfully. Welcome to Thunder Mesa Academy. We're honored by your visit. The honor is mine, Thornton assured him. My territorial legislature has been debating education reforms for 2 years now. Your success here has given ammunition to those of us who believe diversity strengthens rather than weakens communities. As Sam led the delegation toward the main academic building, he reflected on the changes the past decade had brought. Thunder Mesa Academy now encompassed 12 buildings spread across 400 acres, including dormitories, classrooms, workshops, laboratories, and agricultural facilities. The school employed 36 full-time faculty members and served students from 16 different cultural backgrounds. But more than physical growth, the academy had achieved something even more precious. It had proven that healing was possible on a community scale. Former students now served as teachers, translators, merchants, and leaders throughout the Southwest. They carried with them the lessons learned beside the sacred springs, that differences could be sources of strength, that understanding could triumph over prejudice, and that love multiplied when it was shared across cultural boundaries. Samuel, Dr. Morrison called out as she emerged from the medical building with Esperanza and several other faculty members. Now in her 50s, Catherine Morrison had become one of the Academy's most passionate advocates, documenting their methods and publishing papers that had influenced educational policy across multiple territories. The Harper's Weekly photographer wants to capture the morning water ceremony. Esperanza said, her face glowing with the satisfaction of work well done. At 35, she had grown into her role as the Academy's co-director while raising 4 children of her own and serving as surrogate mother to dozens more. And the federal education inspector is particularly interested in our literacy rates, Dr. Morrison added. When he learned that 98% of our graduates achieve college-level reading proficiency in at least 2 languages, he initially assumed we were exaggerating. Governor Thornton raised an eyebrow. College-level literacy in multiple languages. How is that possible? Immersion and necessity, Tahoe explained, approaching the group with his characteristic calm confidence. When children from different backgrounds play together, learn together, and solve problems together, they naturally acquire each other's languages. We simply formalize and expand on that organic process. And it doesn't create confusion or delay their English development. On the contrary, Esperanza replied, multilingual children show enhanced cognitive flexibility and problem-solving abilities. They're better prepared for the increasingly diverse world they'll inherit. As the delegation moved through the Academy's facilities, Sam found himself thinking about the individual stories behind their institutional success. Agnes Tallpine, now in her 70s, taught traditional medicine and storytelling while serving as grandmother figure to 3 generations of students. Captain Sherman, who had resigned his military commission to become the Academy's liaison with federal authorities, helped navigate the complex bureaucracy that governed territorial education. Even some of Kane's former soldiers had found redemption through service to the community they'd once threatened. "This is remarkable," Governor Thornton murmured as they observed a history class where Apache Mexican and Anglo students collaborated on a presentation about territorial water rights. "How do you prevent cultural conflicts when discussing sensitive historical topics?" "We don't prevent them," Tahoe replied. "We use them as learning opportunities. When students from different backgrounds share their perspectives on the same events, they develop nuanced understanding that goes far beyond any single narrative. And when conflicts become heated, we take them to the springs," Gabriel said, having joined the group after finishing his morning chores. Despite his youth, he spoke with the authority of someone who'd grown up mediating between cultures. "The water spirits teach patience and help people remember what they have in common." The delegation exchanged glances that mixed skepticism with curiosity. Most had heard stories about the healing properties of Thunder Mesa's springs, but few outside the immediate community truly understood their significance. "Perhaps you'd like to witness our morning ceremony," Sam suggested. "It's one of our most important traditions." The water ceremony had evolved over the years into a beautiful blend of multiple cultural traditions. Students and faculty gathered in a circle around the sacred springs while representatives from different communities offered blessings in their native languages. The ritual emphasized gratitude, interconnection, and shared responsibility for protecting the gifts they'd been given. As Governor Thornton and his delegation watched Agnes Tallpine step forward to offer the Apache blessing, her aged voice still strong and clear. She was followed by Father Miguel, the Mexican priest, who served the Academy's Catholic families then, by Tahoe speaking in Navajo, and finally by Dr. Morrison offering words of scientific appreciation for the natural wonder they were privileged to protect. But it was Gabriel who provided the ceremony's most moving moment. As the youngest member of the Academy's leadership, he spoke last, his 12-year-old voice carrying across the gathering with surprising authority. "We are children of many peoples," he said in English, then repeated in Spanish and Navajo. "But we are one family united by water that teaches us to flow around obstacles rather than breaking against them. We promise to carry these lessons into the world to build bridges where others build walls, and to remember that healing begins when we see through eyes of love rather than fear." The Harper's Weekly photographer captured the moment as students from diverse backgrounds joined hands around the glowing springs, their faces reflecting the phosphorescent light that had drawn wounded souls to this place for generations. Extraordinary," Governor Thornton whispered, his official composure momentarily overwhelmed by emotion. "I've never seen anything like this." "That's because there isn't anything like this," the federal education inspector added quietly. "Thunder Mesa Academy isn't just educating children, it's creating a new model for how diverse communities can thrive together." As the ceremony concluded and daily classes began, Sam found himself walking with Esperanza toward the memorial garden they'd established to honor those who had made the Academy possible. Stone markers bore the names of Isabella and Diego, of Sam's grandmother, and Tahoe's parents, of all the guardians who had protected the sacred waters through centuries of change and challenge. "Do you think we've done enough?" Esperanza asked, her hand finding his as they stood before Isabella's memorial. "Do you think she would be proud of what we've built?" Sam was quiet for a moment, listening to the sound of children's laughter mixing with the eternal song of the sacred springs. In the distance, he could see students from multiple cultural backgrounds working together in the garden, the workshop, and the classroom, their easy cooperation a testament to the healing that was possible when differences were celebrated rather than feared. "I think," he said finally, "that she would be amazed. We've taken her dream of bridge building and created something even more ambitious, a community that proves healing is possible not just for individuals, but for entire societies wounded by centuries of conflict." Gabriel approached them from the direction of the main building, his young face bright with excitement. "Papa Sam, Mama Esperanza. The Harper's Weekly man wants to interview our family for his article. He says Thunder Mesa Academy might be featured on the magazine's cover." Sam and Esperanza exchanged glances, understanding the significance of such recognition. National attention would bring new opportunities, but also new challenges. Fame could attract supporters and resources, but it might also draw unwanted scrutiny from those who saw their success as a threat to more traditional approaches. What do you think? Esperanza asked. Are we ready for that kind of visibility? The water spirits say yes, Tahoe said, appearing beside them with his characteristic quiet presence. They show me visions of other communities across the country hungry for the kind of healing we found here. Our story could plant seeds that grow into forests of hope. Sam looked around at the academy they'd built from love and loss, at the children who had found healing beside the sacred springs, at the community that had proven cooperation was stronger than conflict. 10 years ago, he'd been a broken man, living in isolation, convinced that his capacity for love had died with his first family. Now he stood surrounded by dozens of children who called him father, hundreds of graduates who carried Thunder Mesa's lessons into the wider world, and a legacy that would influence education and community building for generations to come. Then we're sad, he said, his voice carrying the quiet confidence that had sustained them through every challenge. We've always known this work was bigger than just us. If sharing our story can help others find their own paths to healing, then that's what we'll do. As they walked back toward the main building to meet with the Harper's Weekly reporter, Sam felt a familiar sense of rightness settle over him. The sacred waters continued their eternal song, carrying promises of renewal and hope to all who would listen. And in that song, he could hear the voices of all who had contributed to Thunder Mesa Academy's success, the living and the dead, the famous and the forgotten, all united by the understanding that love was the most powerful force for transformation in the world. The storm that had brought Esperanza to his door 10 years ago seemed like a blessing, now a sacred disruption that had awakened his true purpose. From grief and isolation, they had built a community that proved healing was possible. From broken hearts, they had created a legacy of hope that would endure long after they were gone. The sacred waters sang their eternal song of renewal, and Samuel Crowfeather smiled as he listened to their promise of tomorrow. And there beside the sacred springs that had given them all new life, Samuel Crowfeather understood the profound truth his grandmother had tried to teach him decades ago. When the earth dances with the sky, grandson, pay attention. The spirits are trying to tell you something. The spirits had been telling him that love multiplies when shared across cultural boundaries, that healing happens when we build bridges instead of walls, that the most sacred places on earth are not found in isolation, but in communities where differences become sources of strength rather than division. Thunder Mesa Academy would continue to grow, sending forth graduates who carried its lessons of cooperation and understanding into a rapidly changing world. The sacred waters would keep flowing, calling to broken hearts and offering renewal to all who approached with respect and humility. But perhaps most importantly, the story itself would endure a testament to the power of ordinary people to create extraordinary change when they choose love over fear, inclusion over exclusion, and hope over despair.